Reading other people's work is critical to becoming a better writer. Your ability as a writer is wholly determined by your ability to craft and execute on ideas, and you need some kind of input into your brain in order to do that. And the best input around is reading what other people have written. If your writing is the crop that you reap from your efforts, then reading is the sunlight and rain and petroleum-based fertilizers which help that crop to grow. There are some very specific things you should do when approaching reading as a writer. Doing these things will enhance the effect that reading has on your writing, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Of course, watching can also improve your writing, and if you want to watch more of my videos, consider subscribing to my channel. All right, the first thing to talk about when it comes to reading like a writer is having a strategy around what it is you're reading. Depending on what you want to write or where you want to improve as a writer, what you read will either be helpful or unhelpful. If you are really concerned about market fit and sort of writing to market, then it makes sense to be hyper focused on the books that are in the niche that you want to publish and market in. Knowing trends and reader expectations and what's hot at the moment is very important in these cases if you're really, really concerned about market fit. If you're more interested in sort of general improvement and becoming the best writer that you can be, then exposing your eyeballs to many different writers across different eras and different genres and different styles is probably more beneficial. More diverse input will be more beneficial if what you want is a well-rounded skill set. Ultimately, you need to understand that you have a limited amount of time in which to read. You can't read everything out there, so the importance of what you pick to read can't be understated. But how you read this stuff is equally important. I think anytime a writer sits down to read, you should have some area of focus as far as what the author is doing. There should be some element of the writing that you are consciously paying attention to. It could be focusing on how they write descriptions. It could be looking at how they move through dialogue and action. It could be how they block and move characters around the scene, keep readers apprised of where everybody is sitting or standing. Ideally, the area you focus on would be driven by the areas that you want to improve in your writing. If you see an area that is not where you want it to be in your own writing, if you see an area where you want to improve, that would be a good thing to focus on while you're reading. Related to this is reflecting on what you've read. It's not enough to just read something and move on. You need to reflect on it a little bit, maybe read it a couple times if there's a passage that you find particularly impactful. Back to this idea of if there's something in your own writing that you want to improve, going back and reading specific scenes that you know do the sort of things that you want to do in other books can be very helpful here. When most people read a book that they like, they don't sit down and think about and reflect on why they like it. Writers need to do this down to a very granular level. There are often specific things that an author is doing to create the feelings that you're feeling, and you need to understand what those things are. One really good concrete technique here is when you feel bored with a particular book and you decide to end a reading session, even if it's a book that you're generally enjoying, but you just get to a part and you're like, okay, now's a good time to stop. When that happens, try to understand what led up to that. Reread the section going into when you started to feel like putting the book down and try to understand why you wanted to put the book down at that point. When writers do something good or do something bad, you need to pay attention to it, which brings us to another consideration, and that is that you should spend a lot of time reading writing that you don't like. If you're a pilot, like an airplane pilot, understanding how to properly land a plane safely is really important. But understanding what causes a plane to not land safely or how people commonly screw up landing a plane is arguably equally important. The same thing is true for writers. There are two parts to this. There is reading writing that is lackluster in quality for whatever reason, and then there's also reading writing that doesn't fit your personal preferences, writing that you just don't personally like. This is why being part of a writing group or some kind of critique situation is so important. Beyond all the other benefits that you get from participating in these sorts of things, in critique groups or writing groups, you'll usually encounter a lot of writing from less experienced writers, and that writing will probably have a lot of flaws. You yourself are probably producing writing with at least some of these same flaws, and it's sometimes easier to recognize them in other people's work than it is to recognize them in your own work. Another part to this that I mentioned is reading outside of your preferences, whether that's genre preference or a style preference. This will help you understand why you have that preference. If you're intending to write to market, you also have to understand the preferences of the readers who are part of that market, and those preferences may not line up with your own preferences. Also, I think it's important to understand that reading outside of what you think you like is the best way to find new things that you actually like and didn't think you would like. If you just only ever read the stuff that you know you like, you're never going to discover anything new. If you only ever order cheeseburgers, then you're never going to know if you like sushi or not. This, I think, goes for even if you're not a writer and you're just somebody who likes to read. Reading stuff that's outside of what your normal preferences are from time to time is probably a good thing to do. You'll probably discover stuff that you like that you didn't think you liked. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the effect that doing all this stuff will have on your enjoyment of reading. A lot of people will say that these steps that I've outlined here today will zap the joy out of reading, that it turns reading from something fun into work. And yeah, that's kind of true. If you want reading to move from a fun activity to an activity that improves your writing, then you have to start dissecting your favorite stories. To understand the magic of great writing, it has to stop being magical. Will this ruin something in books? Yeah, it probably will, but I think it opens up another avenue of possibilities. When you read like a writer, you start to see the skill behind the craft, the how behind the wow. That's not my phrase. I saw somebody else using that and I really liked it. I don't think that's better or worse than how most normal people experience what they read. I think it's just different. And if becoming a writer is important to you, that's a sacrifice that you'll just have to be willing to make. Just like I'm glad you sacrificed the last 10 minutes to watch this video, even though it's now over. So there you have it. I'd love to hear your comments or thoughts on this down below. If you're interested in some help with writing your novel, I do have a novel writing program that you can get access to at the link in the video description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.